Hello, everyone. Good day. Welcome to our discussion for today. This is still SS084. This is religions, religious experiences, and spirituality. And so today, our discussion will be concentrating on Buddhism. Now, if you are with me, you can see now on the screen our lesson, and this is all about Buddhism. And so, as we proceed with our lesson, we will first be having an overview of the religion. We will be discussing the history of Buddhism. We will be looking also at the basic doctrines and practices of Buddhism, and also we will look at the influence of Buddhism in Asia and the world. And without further ado, we'll start now with our discussion on the history of Buddhism. As you might already know, the religion of Buddhism was founded by Siddhartha Gautama around 500 BCE. Now, Siddhartha Gautama was actually an Indian prince. He lived a very secluded life. He wanted to know why so many people are experiencing sorrow and suffering because after a couple of decades that he was secluded, that was the moment that he was able to realize what the world looks like, and he found out that there was so much pain, there was so much suffering in the world. And so what he did, because of the suffering that he saw, he left the life of a prince to pursue the answer to his question. And so by doing that, at one point in his life, he sat under a Bodhi tree in the city of Varanasi to find the answer to his questions. And he vowed not to stand up until he got the answers. And so it was under the Bodhi tree that Siddhartha Gautama became enlightened. Now, Siddhartha Gautama added the term Buddha to his name. His new complete name is Siddhartha Gautama Buddha. Buddha meaning the enlightened one. Now, Siddhartha Gautama Buddha's enlightenment led him to come up with Buddhism's core doctrine called the Four Noble Truths. Now, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, in order for a Buddhist, okay, according to Buddha at least, in order for a person to be able to find the truth in his life, there are two extremes which has to be avoided. These two extremes are, first one, you talk about hedonism. Hedonism is the concept of pleasure is pain. Whatever is painful is pleasurable. And the other extreme that should be avoided is what we call this asceticism. Okay, by the use of the middle path or the eightfold path. Now, the noble truth or the four noble truths could actually be lived out by a Buddhist. Now, what are these four noble truths? Now, according to Siddhartha Gautama, he realized that when you talk about life, life is actually all about suffering. The second one is that the origin of suffering is attachment. It's not just life be meaning suffering, but the origin of suffering in life is all about our attachment to things. And also, even though there could be suffering, according to Buddha, the cessation, the end of suffering is actually attainable. And there is a path to the cessation of this suffering. As we move along with our discussion right now, let's look first one by one at these four noble truths. The first one is what we call as life is suffering. Of course, when you talk about suffering, at least according to Buddha, he meant by this that birth is suffering. Living in this world is suffering. Aging is suffering. That's what he saw when after his seclusion as an Indian prince, he saw the life of the people outside of India, and he saw a lot of people dying. Okay, they got no help. And so for him, he thought of life as suffering. Aging is also suffering. Aging and deterioration is suffering. You talk about diseases and whatnot. These are all suffering. And even death. Buddha considered death as suffering. For him, the presence of hateful objects is also suffering. The absence of lovable objects is also suffering. Not getting what we desire, for example, getting what we don't want and not getting what we do want is all about suffering. That's the reason why in the first noble truth of Siddhartha Gautama, when he speaks of life, he knows and he thought of life as suffering because life for him means suffering. And so we will now be proceeding with the second one. The origin of suffering is what? The origin of suffering is attachment. Now, for Buddha, the cause of the suffering of man is because of our selfish cravings. You talk about the tanha or the thirst, the desire. In Christianity, you talk about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. But in Buddhism, you talk about the tanha or the thirst, the desire of an individual, which leads to the concept of rebirth, okay, or reincarnation, and which is accompanied by lust. When you talk about lust, you talk about the lust of the eyes, okay, yung pag tumitingin tayo sa mga bagay na nagugustuhan natin, and we try to covet from other people and whatnot, seeking satisfaction now here, now there. Okay, and in reality, perhaps Buddha might agree with the idea that we're looking for pleasure, we're looking for satisfaction in the wrong places, in the wrong people. Okay, now this selfish cravings take three main forms. The first one is our craving for pleasure, the desire of man for pleasure, and also for man's desire for continued existence, to live longer, perhaps to outlive everyone out there, and also lastly the craving for non-existence, to end everything in life. And also the third noble truth according to Buddha, and this is what he realized, is that even though life means suffering, and even though um, the reason why we suffer is because of our attachment to things in life and to people in life, we should not lose hope, because for him, the cessation or the end of all this suffering is actually attainable. For him, suffering ceases with the complete cessation of selfish craving, meaning we have to give up our selfish desires to be attached to things we want and whatnot. This cessation, which consists in the absence of every passion, okay, no passion, the blowing out of the tanha or the desire, suffering for him ceases or ends with the laying aside, the giving up, being free from, or the dwelling no longer upon these selfish craving. Mind you, that what is emphasized here is not just the concept of craving or desiring for something, but the selfish desire for something. And when he realized that there is a way for suffering to end, and he now leads us into the fourth noble truth, which is the path to the cessation of this suffering. And when we talk about this path to the cessation of the suffering, of course, again, as I said a while ago, you talk about avoiding two extremes. The first one is the concept of hedonism, and the other one is the concept of asceticism. And for Siddhartha Gautama, what we have to realize here is to understand the concept of the eighth, the noble eightfold path, okay, or the eightfold path. Now, when you talk about this eightfold path, this is how we try to set aside, okay, all those selfish cravings, all those selfish desires, and he divided this into eight. The first one is what we call as the right view. The second one is right intention. Next one is what we call the right speech. Next one is right action. The fifth one is right livelihood, and then you have right effort. Also, you got right mindfulness, and also you have right concentration. If we are going to divide these eightfold path into these talks about wisdom, it speaks of morality. You talk about meditation, and for Buddha, when you talk about right view and right intention, it's all about wisdom. We talk about right speech, right action, and right livelihood. It's all about morality, doing what is right. And when you talk about right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, we talk about what? It speaks of meditation. Okay. Now, many Indians in Siddhartha Gautama Buddha's time believed in his teachings. In fact, the Mauryan Emperor Asoka believed in Buddhism, and made Buddhism the official religion of his empire, the Mauryan Empire. As Buddhism spread to lands also outside of India. um, the Maurya Empire is a local Indian kingdom that rose after the Greek conquest of India. And for many centuries later, Buddhism became the dominant religion in many parts of Asia, particularly in the Indian subcontinent. And so at the moment, there are around half a billion Buddhists around the world. Now, there are two sects of Buddhism. The first one is the Mahayana Buddhism, where they believe that aside from Siddhartha Gautama, any human can be a Buddha. Okay, now countries like Vietnam, China, Japan, Korea, and Mongolia are mostly Mahayana are mostly believers of the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism. Again, when we talk about the Mahayana Buddhism, they believe that it's not only Siddhartha Gautama who can be a Buddha, but any human being can become a Buddha. And this has been the Buddhist traditions in countries like Vietnam, China, Japan, Korea, and Mongolia. The second sect of Buddhism is what we call as the Theravada Buddhism, where the opposite of which is Mahayana Buddhism. Now, when we speak of the Theravada Buddhism, it says that only Siddhartha Gautama can become a Buddha, and this is prevalent. Okay, this sect of Buddhism is actually very much prevalent in countries like Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Sri Lanka, and Myanmar. Okay, and so let's now proceed with the doctrines of Buddhism. And when we speak about these doctrines, of course, we have to look at the concept of the Bodhisattva. Now, the Bodhisattva is actually, these are actually people who have reached the Buddha stage, but they want to step back to help the other ordinary human beings to reach enlightenment. So when you see monks with shaved heads and wear orange garments, so they are considered as the bodhisattvas. Now, Buddhists do not actually believe in any god, so they do not. It's not actually a theistic religion because they do not really believe in any particular god. Buddha is not considered as a god in Buddhism. Okay, Buddha is not God, but their founder and teacher. The goal of every Buddhist is to reach Buddhahood, at least for the Mahayana tradition, the Mahayana Buddhist. And for the Theravada Buddhists, the goal of Buddhism is to reach nirvana, okay, which we will later on discuss. Now, let's look at these different concepts first. Let's look at the concept of samsara. Now, when we speak of samsara, this the concept of the cycle of birth and rebirth. So perhaps this could be considered as the concept of the reincarnation and whatnot. Okay, and of course, you talk about the concept of karma. The karma is the driving force of the cycle of birth and rebirth, or samsara. Okay, whatever your karma is will be reflected in your samsara. Okay, now one's next life will definitely depend on one's actions in his current life. Okay, also the practice of yoga, okay, meaning the postures and meditations to empty one's mind, is actually of Buddhist tradition. It's of Buddhist origin. Okay, and you talk about the concept of nirvana, okay, or the state of freedom from samsara. The Theravada Buddhists actually are very much championing these idea. Now, how do they reach nirvana if there is samsara? Now, this is what you call as the purging of the person. Okay, the cycle of birth and rebirth will happen until such time that an individual is already clean and pruned, that he will be able to attain enlightenment, thus reach nirvana for the Theravada Buddhists. And at least for the Mahayana Buddhists, they will reach the concept of Buddhahood. Now, you have to understand as well that there is no single Buddhist Bible. In fact, Buddhists have several fragmented literature, and each sect of Buddhism or place have their own set of scriptures. Now, there are what we call as the three jewels of Buddhism. The first one is what we call the Buddha, the Dharma, the second one, and the other one is what we call as the Sangha. Okay, now when we talk about the Buddha, okay, so trying to reach the state of nirvana or Buddhahood, the Dharma is when we try to study their holy scriptures. The third one is the Sangha, which involves oneself in the congregation of the monks. Now, Buddhists actually believe in the 10 Buddhist ethics. Now, what are the 10 Buddhist ethics? The first one is to refrain from taking life. So you talk about the concept of in the Christian perspective, we have in the Ten Commandments, we have the idea of thou shall not kill. This is very much similar with the Buddhist tradition, the Buddhist ethics of refraining from taking life, not only of yourself, but also of other people. The other one is refraining from committing theft, right? In the Christian tradition, in the Ten Commandments, it says what? Do not steal. Thou shall not steal. Another one is what we call as refraining from sexual misconduct. That's the third one. The fourth one is refrain from lying. Okay. The next one is refrain from intoxicants. Okay. Pag-iinom. Okay. Nakakalasing. Refrain from eating at the wrong time. Okay. For them, when you say refraining from eating at the wrong time, that is kapag wala ng araw, dapat hindi ka na kumakain. Okay? So you have to refrain from eating at a wrong time. Also, for Buddhism, we should refrain from dancing and singing. Also, Buddhism believes in refraining oneself from using perfume and jewelry. And also, we speak of refraining from using luxurious chairs and beds. And lastly, refraining from accepting gold and silver. So, those are the 10 Buddhist ethics. Now, when we speak of the influence of Buddhism right now in the world, we have to understand that Buddhism has, excuse me, half a billion believers all over the world, mostly in Asia. Okay, Buddhist temples and statues of Buddha abound in Asia. So if you are looking at Siddhartha Gautama, he is somehow the counterpart of Jesus Christ in Christianity and also the counterpart of Muhammad in Islam. Now, Myanmar is known as the country with thousands of Buddhist temples. Giant Buddha statues are built in Myanmar, in Thailand, in Cambodia, in China, in Indonesia, each having a local face. Now, Indian Buddha statues are skinny, okay, because the reason being is because they portray Buddha as fasting to achieve nirvana, while Chinese Buddha statues are obese because of their belief that Buddha is prosperous. Okay, now the expression Buddha bless you. I'm sure you have already heard of this one. The expression Buddha bless you, when somebody sneezes, is common even in Western countries. Sneezing is a sign that you have caught a cold. And the phrase Buddha bless you is a prayer for you to get well. Now, the Chinese custom of also naming years by animals, like year of the monkey, year of the pig, and whatnot, is actually a Buddhist origin. Is a Buddhist origin. Now, these are the 12 animals who visited Buddha. Now, in Tibet, the highest priest is called as the Dalai Lama. He's like the Pope in the Tibetan Buddhism. Tibet is a country north of India and Nepal, but was conquered by China. Now, it is just a province of China. The Dalai Lama fled from the communist Chinese. He's now living in Nepal. Okay, Tibetans, Nepal is an independent country. Tibetans are continuously protesting the Chinese invasion of their country and the suppression of their religion by the Chinese. In fact, Tibetan Buddhists burned themselves alive during the 2008 Beijing Olympics to raise awareness in the world of what China did to their country and to their religion. Western critics attribute to Buddhism the passive and non-violent attitudes of Asians instead of being aggressive and pursuing excellence, which is very much a Western concept. Asians are very much quiet. We are very much passive, and we go for the middle way. Okay, it's a matter of compromising. However, some Westerners would see this as mediocrity, and that wraps up our discussion on the influence of Buddhism. And these also wraps up our discussion on Buddhism. Thank you very much for joining us in our discussion today on Buddhism. Again, this has been Sir E, now signing off.